He was one of Mexico's most notorious cartel leaders, wanted in the U.S. with a $15 million reward. Now, sources tell ABC News that the man known as El Mencho is...
Well, Americans are finally able to leave resort towns in Mexico after a notorious drug cartel leader was killed.
Such a scary situation for them. Now the department over there has...
If I told you that a fifth-grade dropout from the mountains of Michoacan ran one of the largest criminal empires in the Western Hemisphere for more than 2 decades, what would you say? We are talking about Nemesio Oseguera, Cervantes, also known as El Mencho, the leader of CJNG, who is alleged to have controlled networks trafficking cocaine, methamphetamine, and fentanyl into the United States, siphoned fuel from the national pipeline system, ran cross-border fraud rings, laundered money through dozens of shell companies, and expanded his influence into more than 40 countries. This once-deported immigrant rose from impoverished avocado fields to a criminal machine estimated to be worth roughly $50 billion. But here is the insane part. He is believed to have built all of it by exploiting the very gaps in law enforcement and economic systems designed to stop him. Do not look away. This is the full story of how a hidden empire challenged the United States and Mexico for more than a decade. The Ghost. With a $15 million price tag, February 22, 2026, 4 a.m., the mountains of southern Jalisco, Mexico. The most wanted man in the world has just been located. For more than a decade, 2 governments hunted him like a shadow. The DEA posted a $15 million reward for information leading to his capture, one of the highest bounties in the history of United States law enforcement. Interpol placed his name on the Red Notice list. The CIA maintained surveillance operations in the skies over Mexico. But for years, all they had was an aging face, fewer than 3 verified photographs, blurred, outdated images as if they belonged to someone who had vanished long ago. In classified files and intelligence briefings on wanted posters, the same grainy image of a man no one could touch appeared again and again. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes. The world knew him as El Mencho. The operation that night had one single objective: capture alive, handcuffs, airlift to Mexico City, interrogation, extradition. A trial both Washington and Mexico City had been waiting on for years. But the mountains did not care about plans on paper. As special forces approached the cabin hidden among pine trees, gunfire erupted. Not warning shots, real combat. CJNG responded with heavy fire. El Mencho and his security detail attempted to move to another position in the cold mist of the highlands. Minutes later, he was hit. The man who had ordered the shoot-down of a Mexican military helicopter in 2015 to clear his escape route now lay on the floor of another military helicopter, receiving IV fluids as the rotors churned the air. He did not survive. El Mencho died during air transport before he could answer a single question. No testimony, no trial, no sentence ever read. A hunt that lasted more than 10 years ended in the skies above Jalisco. But that death did not close the story. It opened a larger paradox. A man who was nearly invisible. No interviews, no public boasting, no carefully crafted image. Yet he was believed to stand behind a system worth $50 billion. A machine spanning narcotics, stolen fuel, financial fraud, and political protection networks. 2 governments, thousands of law enforcement personnel, satellite technology, drones, cross-border intelligence. And yet one man with only a few old photographs managed to build a massive financial empire right under their noses. This is not simply a story about guns. This is the story of a man who understood the system deeply enough to exploit its gaps. And you will not truly understand why he is considered one of the most dangerous criminals of the century until you see how El Mencho created $50 billion by bending the very power structures built to stop him. To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning, to a village without electricity, without paved roads, where a 5th-grade dropout stood in an avocado field, and no one imagined his name would one day become a $15 million price hanging in the dark. From avocado fields to federal prison, before the nickname, before the $15 million bounty, before 2 governments had to speak his name in security meetings, there was a boy born in 1966 in the mountains of Michoacan. No electricity, no paved roads, no choices. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes grew up in Tierra Caliente, a place where people say the two fastest-growing things are avocados and organized crime. A large family, little land. School was only a brief stop. He finished 5th grade and left the classroom behind. While other children were still learning to read, he was already standing in the fields harvesting avocados under the harsh sun. Poverty does not create criminals, but it teaches people how to survive. Before the age of 20, he left Mexico. No documents, no clear plan. Just one simple thing: a desire to escape the cycle of poverty. California in the 1980s was not a promised land for undocumented immigrants. It was a place where the fast survived and the slow were swallowed. In 1986, he was arrested. Stolen property. Carrying a firearm. A police file opened listing the name of an undocumented immigrant youth. No one looking at that booking photo thought it was the future of a drug empire. He was deported. He came back. In 1989, he was arrested again, this time connected to narcotics, deported again, and he came back again. By September 1992, Nemesio was 26 years old. He and his brother Abraham walked into the Imperial Bar in San Francisco to conduct what passed for a small deal in the underworld, at the time 5 ounces of heroin priced at $9,500. Not $1 million transaction. Just another step in a slow money trail. But something felt wrong. The money was too clean, too neat, stacked like it had just come from a bank. Nemesio grew suspicious. He told his brother the buyers were undercover cops. His instinct was right. 3 weeks later, both were arrested on federal drug trafficking charges. In the courtroom, the most important moment was not the sentencing. It came before that. Abraham already had 2 felony convictions. One more could push him into an extreme sentencing range. Nemesio faced a choice: split the responsibility evenly or take most of it to protect his brother. He pleaded guilty, not out of nobility, not to be a hero, but because in his value system at the time, family came before the law. The judge sentenced him to 5 years. He served roughly 3 years at Big Spring Correctional Center, a federal prison in West Texas that primarily held undocumented immigrants. There, he was not a boss, not a leader, just a number in the system. But prison had one unique lesson. It taught you how the system works. In 1997, Nemesio was released and deported back to Mexico. 31 years old. A federal record. Barred from returning to the United States. Most men in that position would fade into obscurity. A closed file. A name erased from the map. He did not disappear. He put on a police uniform. And that was the move no one saw coming. Studying the system from the inside. After being deported in 1997, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes returned to Mexico with a federal conviction, and something many in the underworld never had. He had seen how a major legal system operated from the inside. Instead of immediately returning to his old path, he chose a move no one expected. He joined the local police force in the state of Jalisco. This was not a story of reform or redemption. This was a study phase. As a police officer, he did not need to stand out. He needed to observe. He learned how an investigation was opened, how information moved through command levels, how many approvals a raid required before it could be launched. He saw the difference between procedures on paper and reality on the street. More importantly, he understood the system's structure. Budgets were limited. Shifts were assigned on fixed schedules. Patrol routes repeated out of habit. Rapid response units needed time to assemble. None of this was classified. But when combined, it formed a map of delays and gaps. The system looked solid from a distance. But from the inside, he realized it was built by people. And people always have limits. Not everyone is corrupt, but only one person willing to take money is enough for information to leak. Not every operation is compromised, but one early phone call is enough to change the outcome. He did not need to destroy the system. He only needed to understand how it reacted. This was first-level finessing. Not using violence against the law, but understanding the law well enough to predict its next move. When you know how your opponent will respond, you can move one step ahead. When you know how long a process takes, you can withdraw before the net closes. Time in the police force did not make him a better man. It made him a more dangerous one. When he left the uniform behind, he did not return to the underworld with only small-time trafficking experience. He carried with him a map of the law enforcement system that many of his rivals had never seen. He joined the Mencho cartel at a time when Jalisco was changing. Criminal alliances began to fracture under federal pressure. In 2010, Nacho Coronel was shot dead during a military operation, creating a massive power vacuum in the region. The Mencho cartel weakened its old structure, cracked, and smaller groups began fighting for influence. In that world, most gunmen chose to settle things with firepower. Mencho saw a different opportunity. He did not just understand how cartels worked, he understood how the state would react when a cartel expanded. That was a strategic advantage. And from that moment on, the game was no longer about who had more guns. The game became about who understood the system better. Building CJNG from a power vacuum. In 2010, when Nacho Coronel was shot dead during an operation by the Mexican military, many people saw it as just another name falling in the drug war. But in the underworld, that death was more than news. It was a vacuum. And a power vacuum in the cartel world is like a vacuum in physics. It pulls in anyone ambitious and reckless enough to step forward. The Mencho cartel, where Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was operating, began to fracture. Old structures wobbled. Alliances shifted. Smaller branches split off to protect themselves. In that moment of chaos, Mencho did not choose to hide. He chose to build. CJNG, the Cartel Jalisco. New Generation was born directly from that collapse, not from a solid foundation, but from the remnants. And Mencho understood one thing: power does not come from inheritance. It comes from the ability to seize the moment. He aligned with the Gonzalez Valencia family, a money laundering network with deep ties in both Mexico and abroad. This was not just a marriage of guns and money. It was a fusion of violence and clean cash flow. A cartel can shoot, but if it cannot launder money, it suffocates. CJNG did not suffocate. While the Sinaloa cartel was still the dominant name, Mencho declared war. This was not the move of a weaker player. It was a declaration that a new order was forming. The war between CJNG and Sinaloa was not just about territory. It was about establishing a brand. And CJNG built that brand through calculated violence. In 2015, when the Mexican military launched an operation to capture Mencho, his forces shot down a military helicopter with a rocket-propelled grenade. Images of the burning wreckage spread across the media. The message was unmistakable. CJNG was not afraid of direct confrontation with the state. Within 6 weeks that same year, 24 police officers were killed in Western Mexico. Not because each of them had a personal feud with the cartel. It was a message. When an organization can kill law enforcement in succession, like that, it is building its reputation through fear. Violence here was not simply a tool to eliminate rivals. It was a marketing strategy. It forced smaller groups to choose join or disappear. By 2020, the assassination attempt on Omar Garcia Harfuch, then the chief of police of Mexico City, further reinforced that image. His motorcade was attacked in broad daylight on one of the capital's largest avenues. The message was broadcast nationwide: CJNG could reach anyone. While the media focused on the gunfire, few noticed the quiet expansion of CJNG's network. According to assessments by United States authorities, CJNG now had a presence in all 50 states and more than 40 countries. From a splinter group born out of chaos in 2010, it became one of the largest transnational criminal organizations on the planet. In 2019, the DEA estimated that CJNG trafficked at least 1/3 of the drugs entering the United States. Pause on that number. 1/3. If that entire flow reached the market without interception, the consequences would not stop at cartel profits. They would appear in overloaded healthcare systems from overdoses in communities devastated by addiction, and in skyrocketing law enforcement and social welfare costs. When an organization controls 1/3 of the drug flow into the world's largest economy, it is no longer a local gang. It is an underground economic entity, with influence comparable to many legitimate corporations. From a power vacuum in 2010, Mencho built a machine, powered by violence and money. And every shot fired, every attack carried out was not only meant to eliminate rivals. It was meant to carve one message into reality. CJNG had arrived, and it had no intention of asking permission to exist. The $50 billion machine. If you only look at the guns, you might think CJNG is a violent organization. If you only look at the burning helicopter in 2015, you might think this is a story of war. But violence is just the shell. What makes El Mencho a real threat is not the gunfire, it is the money-making machine behind it. People talk about the figure of $50 billion when they talk about CJNG. Even if that number reflects the total assets and cash flow of the entire system, rather than a personal bank account, it still captures the scale of a machine operating like a transnational corporation. And what matters is that this machine does more than traffic drugs. It exploits the very structures the state built to manage society. The first pillar is narcotics, cocaine, methamphetamine, and especially fentanyl. CJNG does not simply move product. It builds cross-border networks with a fragmented structure, where each region operates almost independently while remaining aligned within a shared strategy. When one link is arrested, the system does not collapse. It adapts. This structure resembles a multinational corporation more than a street gang. According to DEA estimates in 2019, CJNG controlled at least 1/3 of the drugs entering the United States. When an organization holds 1/3 of the market share in the world's largest black market, it has crossed into the economic realm not just criminality, but drugs alone are not enough to create a $50 billion machine. The second pillar reveals the true level of finessing, fuel theft, and crude oil trafficking. According to the United States Treasury Department, networks linked to CJNG generate hundreds of millions of dollars each year from this activity. They tap directly into national energy infrastructure. Fuel pipelines are punctured. Oil tanker routes are manipulated. This is not just stealing goods. It is parasitizing the formal economy. When a cartel can extract money from a country's energy system and continue operating for years, it shows a deep understanding of how that system functions and where its gaps are. This is second-level finessing, taking money from national infrastructure without needing to control it openly. The third pillar is more subtle and far less bloody, but no less dangerous. Timeshare fraud targeting United States citizens. In tourist cities like Puerto Vallarta, call centers operate like legitimate businesses. Employees speak fluent English. They impersonate lawyers, real estate brokers, even government agencies. According to FBI reports, American victims lost nearly $300 million between 2019 and 2023 to these schemes. There are no gunshots here, no highway shootouts, just phone calls, emails, and forged contracts. This is third-level finessing, exploiting gaps in international law, where cross-border prosecution is complex and slow. When money flows through multiple countries and intermediary accounts, accountability becomes blurred. The final pillar is what keeps the other three standing: political protection. Criminologist Edgardo Buscaglia has described CJNG as one of the largest buyers of politicians and campaign financing. While not every allegation has reached a courtroom, realities on the ground in many regions show the cartel building what it calls a social base, by funding, assisting, and sometimes replacing the role of government. In 2020, during the COVID pandemic, images of food boxes bearing the CJNG logo distributed to poor residents spread across social media. When a criminal organization hands out rice and essentials, while the state struggles, the line between legitimate authority and real power begins to blur. This is the core point. $50 billion does not come from drugs alone. It comes from the ability to exploit the system at multiple levels. At the border, in energy infrastructure, in international legal loopholes, and within local political structures. El Mencho does not need to declare himself a state. He only needs the system to operate in ways that benefit him. And when you see the full picture, you understand why arresting or killing a leader does not automatically stop the machine. Because that machine was not built on violence alone. It was built on an understanding of the system deep enough to turn the very barriers meant to stop it into pathways for profit. The hunt how two governments closed in. For years, El Mencho existed like a shadow. No statements, no public appearances, no obvious public mistakes. But every empire has limits, and those limits often do not come from the outside first. They start with small cracks on the inside. In late 2024, the United States Department of State raised the reward for information leading to the capture or conviction of Mencho to $15 million. That was not just a number, it was a signal. When a government puts that price on a person's head, they are saying this is no longer a routine priority. This is a strategic target. At the same time, Washington announced the creation of an interagency force focused on major cartels. Task Force Counter Cartel was not a street-level combat unit. It was an analysis engine, a fusion center that connected intelligence and data from the DEA, the CIA, the Department of Defense, and other agencies. The goal was not a single raid. The goal was to choke the entire network. Intelligence drones began flying more heavily over Mexican airspace under security cooperation agreements. Signals movement and financial data were compiled into what intelligence professionals call a target package. A file that did not just map one man's location, but mapped the network around him. And Mencho's network began to tighten. In the 15 months before he died, the closest names around him started disappearing from the safe zone one by one. In November 2024, his son-in-law was arrested in California. In February 2025, his brother Antonio was extradited to the United States. The next day, his brother Abraham, the same brother he once took the fall for in 1992, was captured again by the Mexican military. A few weeks later, his son El Menchito was sentenced to life plus additional years in a United States federal court and ordered to forfeit billions of dollars. These were not isolated arrests. This was an isolation strategy. When each financial and family link is cut, the man at the top does not just lose protectors. He loses the people who hold the money, move the messages, and hide the locations. Assets were frozen. Front companies were placed under sanctions. International transactions faced tighter scrutiny. A system that once moved with flexibility began to feel pressure from multiple directions at once. At the same time, Mencho's health became a factor few spoke about publicly, but every intelligence service cared about. Since 2019, reports of his severe kidney disease had surfaced in security assessments. Kidney disease does not care how many bodyguards you have. It demands regular treatment, and regular treatment creates a schedule. A schedule creates rhythm. Rhythm creates patterns, and patterns can be tracked. If Mencho once could move continuously through the mountains of Jalisco, Michoacán, and Colima, without sleeping 2 nights in the same place, illness forced him to calculate differently. Medical equipment, medication, and support staff cannot always relocate like a guerrilla column. The more people who know, the higher the risk. Then the final factor appeared: a lover. According to official reports, a monitored romantic relationship contributed to locating him in the Tapalpa area. In a world where every call can be intercepted and every movement can be logged, emotion becomes the hardest leak to control. The network was being choked, the finances were locked down, the family was being arrested, the health was weakening, and one emotional link was being watched. By early 2026, Mencho was no longer the man surrounded by the same airtight protection as before. He was still dangerous, but no longer untouchable. When the Mexican military received confirmation of his location in Tapalpa, the operation was greenlit at the highest level. This was not just a sweep. This was the climax of years of intelligence coordination between 2 governments. And through all of it, one question still hung in the air. $15 million is a number that can change many lives. In a system where loyalty is often tied to money and power, did someone look at that number and decide silence was no longer worth it? No one has answered that question publicly. But when you watch the network collapse piece by piece, when you see the closest people taken one after another, when you understand that a seriously ill man cannot run forever through mountains and forests, you realize the hunt did not end with a single shot. It ended when there was nowhere left that was safe enough to hide. Death in the air, and Mexico on fire. In the early hours of February 22, 2026, the operation in Tapalpa did not end with a clean capture the way it looked on paper. It unfolded in 2 consecutive firefights. The first wave came as special forces approached the house in the forest. The second came when Mencho and his security detail tried to move to another position to break out of the encirclement. Gunfire cracked through mountain fog. When it settled, he was badly wounded. He was loaded onto a helicopter with the goal of transferring him to medical care, and then to Mexico City. But the man who once escaped a manhunt by shooting down a military helicopter in 2015 died on a military helicopter in 2026. A hunt of more than 10 years closed in midair. The response came almost immediately. Within hours, 85 roadblocks went up in flames across multiple routes. Trucks were set on fire. Highways were blocked. Guadalajara slipped into paralysis. Airports turned chaotic as flights were canceled and passengers scattered between rumors and sirens. At least 25 members of the National Guard were killed in the wave of violence that followed. This was no longer a capture operation. It was a national shock. The White House confirmed it had provided intelligence support to Mexico. President Claudia Sheinbaum acknowledged security cooperation with the United States, but emphasized this was not an assassination. It was a capture operation that turned into combat. The paradox is that she had previously expressed public doubt about the strategy of taking out the head of the snake, arguing it only creates more violence. Yet in the end, she was the one who authorized the largest operation of her own era. A story with no ending. Who will deal with the aftermath? El Mencho is dead, but CJNG is not. That is the coldest truth in this entire story. When an empire is built around one person, people often believe that removing the person will cause the structure to collapse on its own. History shows the opposite. When El Chapo was captured and later extradited, the Sinaloa cartel did not disappear. It fragmented. Factions fought for control. Violence did not drop. It changed shape. CJNG was built in a way that is even harder to bring down. El Mencho did not concentrate all power into one single center. He allowed regions to operate with a high level of autonomy. Local commanders controlled their own territory supply and cash flow as long as they stayed loyal to the overall structure. When one link is removed, the rest do not stand around waiting for instructions. They adapt. That means El Mencho's death does not equal the collapse of the $50 billion machine. It only creates a new vacuum at the top of the pyramid. And a vacuum at the top is often more dangerous than a vacuum in the middle. The biggest risk right now is not that CJNG disappears, it is who steps in next. When an organization controls a network stretching across more than 40 countries and has a presence in all 50 states, that kind of power cannot sit empty for long. If no one is strong enough to hold the balance, internal factions may begin fighting for it. And every fight pulls violence behind it. Supporters of the head of the snake strategy will treat El Mencho's death as a symbolic win. A message that no one stands above the law. But symbolic wins do not always mean long-term stability, because when a system is designed to run on its own, the founder can leave and the structure can keep moving. So does $50 billion disappear when the founder dies? Or does it simply change hands? If the money comes from cross-border drug trafficking, stolen fuel financial fraud and protection networks, those cash flows do not automatically stop just because one man is gone. They need a new manager. And in the underworld, there is always someone ready to step into an empty seat. The bigger question sits on the state side. Is the spotlight of a successful operation strong enough to cool the remaining dark zones? Or will the shadow of violence stretch out, restructure, and return? Under another name, El Mencho died on a helicopter. But the system he built did not die with him. And what worries people is not that one man fell. It is that the machine that once ran under his shadow is still there, waiting to see who takes the wheel next.
We encourage viewers to approach the content with an open mind, critical thinking, and to always cross-reference with multiple sources in order to form their own perspective. That's the reality of the game. Fame always comes with a price. If you vibe with the content and want the real uncut stories, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe to the Black Vault.